My name is Rosalind Carter, 26 years old. The day I came back from the most successful business trip of my life, I thought I would unlock the door and walk into the house where I had lived for almost my entire life. But instead, 15 bulging black trash bags holding all my belongings were dumped right in front of the gate. My mother, Elaine, stood blocking the door with my brother Greg and my sister Melissa, their faces cold as if I were a stranger. "You're 26 now. It's time to take care of yourself," my mother said, as if the years I had contributed to rent, done chores, and been by her side had never existed. Have you ever been thrown out on the street by your own family as if you were nothing to them? Share your story in the comments. Hit like and subscribe to the channel to follow me through this journey, because what happened next was crueler and more shocking than you could imagine. My father died when I was only 8. That day was a gray winter day in the suburbs of Minneapolis, snow falling so heavily that it seemed to swallow all sound. I still remember clearly the image of my mother, Elaine, standing on the porch, a wool scarf hastily wrapped around her, eyes red but voice steady as she told the neighbors, "I will raise all 3 of them. No one needs to worry." She kept her word. Elaine worked 2 jobs, days at an insurance office, nights at a family diner, to raise us. But the price she paid was becoming strict and controlling, as if loosening her grip even a little would throw life into chaos. Years later, Mom had my half-brother, Evan. Greg, my oldest brother, was 16 at the time and instantly became the man of the house in her eyes. He was always her pride, excellent grades, disciplined, never causing her worry. Later, Greg went to medical school and became a surgeon, the exact path my mother had mapped out. Melissa, my sister 2 years younger than Greg, shaped her life early on as a perfect replica of my mother. Hardworking, ambitious, and always chasing clear goals. She studied law and became a corporate attorney at a big firm. To my mother, Greg and Melissa were living proof of her success in raising children. And then there was me. I liked drawing, writing, coming up with unconventional ideas. I chose marketing, then joined a tech startup, a lively but risky environment my mother called an unstable job. At 26, I was still single, without a home of my own, and in her eyes that meant not moving forward. Every family dinner, I heard the same refrain. "When Melissa was your age, she was already working at the top law firm in the state," my mother said, not even looking at me. Greg would add, his voice gentle but loaded with meaning, "Maybe you should think about switching to something more stable. Marketing is fun, sure, but it doesn't always pay the bills." I gave a faint smile and continued eating, knowing that any rebuttal would be branded as talking back to your elders. After graduating, I chose to stay in my mother's house. Partly because housing prices in Minneapolis kept climbing, partly because I wanted to save for my own apartment. At first, my mother agreed easily, "Stay as long as you want, as long as you chip in a little and help with the housework." But chip in a little turned out to mean paying almost as much as renting a room elsewhere, plus doing nearly all the household chores. From cleaning, laundry, and cooking to driving her to the grocery store, doctor's appointments, or church meetings. If I refused because of work, she would sweetly but pointedly say, "Are you busier than I was when I had to work 2 jobs to raise 3 kids?" Greg and Melissa were rarely home, but whenever they were, they always sided with her. If I disagreed about anything, Greg would put on his serious face. "Rosalind, Mom did everything for us. You should be grateful." Melissa was softer, but her words were no different. "You're still young. You'll understand when you have a family." They didn't exactly hate me, but to them I would always be the youngest who hasn't grown up yet. Someone who needed guidance, correction, and sometimes judgment. On nights when Greg and Melissa were at their own places, I would sit at the kitchen table, listening to my mother talk about the neighbors, her co-workers, or her youth. Sometimes she was gentle, but more often her stories came with comparisons. "You know, the Harris's daughter just bought a house at 25. Or, when I was your age, I didn't have anyone helping me, but I still took care of everything." I learned to smile even when I was exhausted inside. Every time I got up from the table, it felt like I had finished a reverse therapy session, where the patient had to heal the therapist. Still, I stayed, thinking that if I was patient and saved enough, one day I would leave quietly. I never imagined that the day I left would come sooner, more abruptly, and far more harshly than any scenario I had pictured. But before that happened, life stayed in its familiar loop. Work, come home, do chores, listen to comparisons, then head back to the office the next morning. To the neighbors, we looked like the perfect family. A resilient widowed mother, 2 successful children, and one youngest finding her path. But behind the blue front door, that perfection was held together by unspoken rules and the demand that everyone follow a single mold. A mold I had never felt I belonged to. I didn't know then that all these simmering tensions had formed a ticking time bomb. All it needed was the right trigger and it would explode. And then, that trigger came faster and harder than I expected. I still remember standing in the yard, both hands gripping my bag straps, eyes moving from one familiar yet distant face to another. In my head, questions tumbled over each other. Why today, and most of all, how long had they planned this? I got back from Seattle. I haven't even put my suitcase down and you're doing this. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my throat was tight. Greg crossed his arms, his gaze icy. It's time for you to stand on your own. Mom's made that clear to you many times. I turned to my mother. We've never had this conversation, Mom. She sighed, her eyes sliding away. Melissa kept checking her phone as if this had nothing to do with her. Just as I was about to speak again, a quiet voice came from behind the trash bags. Sis, I think you should know. I froze. It was Evan, my younger half-brother. The one who rarely got involved in family arguments, always choosing silence or avoidance. He stepped forward, glanced quickly at Mom, then took a deep breath. Mom sold the house. To a rich couple. For a very high price. The air shifted instantly. Melissa looked up, Greg frowned, and Mom spun around. Evan. Her voice sliced through the air like a knife, but it was too late. I stared at my brother. Sold the house? Since when? Over a month ago. They offered extra money if they could move in early, so. He hesitated. So Mom decided you had to move out right away. So this is the real reason? Not because you want me to be independent like you say, but because you want the bonus early? Greg jumped in, his tone defensive. This is for the good of everyone. Mom's done everything to provide for us. For the good of everyone? When you all decided behind my back, picked the exact time I was away on a business trip to clear out my things, and kicked me out without warning. Melissa set her phone down. You've lived here for 3 years after graduating. You haven't paid a dime toward the mortgage. Mom's just being fair. What do you call the money I pay every month? Rent? A contribution? Or just something for you to claim I've paid my share to live here, when in reality it's treated like a top-up for the bills? And what about the times I skipped work to take you to the doctor, fix the wiring, or do laundry for the whole house? Or is all of that simply the default duty of the youngest child? My mother frowned, her voice sharp. Don't use that tone with me. Living in this house for the past 3 years has been a privilege. I narrowed my eyes. A privilege? In the very house Dad left to all of us? Do you remember the will? Dad divided the ownership of this house equally among the 3 of us. You have the right to live here, but not to sell it without everyone's consent. Greg's expression flickered with irritation while Melissa looked away. Evan stayed still, his hands clenched. That will, my mother spoke, trying to sound calm, is an old document. I manage this house and the decisions are mine to make. I let out a short, bitter laugh. You're right? Or the family's right when you cut me out of every decision? Greg shrugged. We've all agreed. You're the only one against it. Agreed. I repeated. Agreed between who? You, Mom, and Melissa? What about Evan? Did anyone even ask him? Evan opened his mouth but went silent when Mom glanced at him. I understood. He was still trapped under the same pressure I had endured for years. The fear of being seen as a traitor to the family. And what about reducing my inheritance? Evan said you plan to deduct the 3 years I've lived here as some kind of debt. Do you really think that's fair? Mom didn't answer right away, but her silence said enough. Melissa finally cut in. You've benefited for too long. This is how we even it out. I turned to Evan. Is it true Mom said that? He gave a small, apologetic nod. I didn't want you to find out like this. But they planned to let you leave without knowing anything. A chill ran down my spine. So the averted eyes, the short replies, the long silences in our messages these past weeks, they weren't random. They'd been planning this. The weight of betrayal mixed with a surge of anger. You discussed this behind my back. You chose the moment I was gone to do it. Why? Afraid I'd fight back? Or didn't want to see my face when my own family kicked me out? Greg frowned, starting to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. Don't. I don't want to hear another excuse. From the moment Evan slipped, I knew no one would bother to hide it anymore. The truth was out, and the gap between me and them had turned into a canyon. I dragged my suitcase to the curb, avoiding Greg's and Melissa's eyes as they stood there, almost guarding the door to make sure I wouldn't come back. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the handle tight to keep it steady. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Jenna, my best friend from college who lived in St. Paul. I answered, trying to keep my voice calm but failing to hide the crack in it. Jenna, can you come get me? Rosalind? What's going on? You got back. I'll explain later. I can't stay here another minute. Jenna said firmly, send me the address. I'm on my way. I bent down and began lifting the trash bags. The plastic crackled and a mix of smells, clothes, old books, and things that weren't even mine rose up. Some bags were so heavy I had to drag them. Opening one to check, hoping to find my jewelry box, I saw at the bottom a yellowed paper envelope. The handwriting in the corner was instantly familiar. My father's, and it made my chest tighten. I sat right on the curb, tore open the flap. Inside was a photocopy of a legal document. The bold title read, Last Will and Testament of Thomas Carter. I scanned it quickly, each word burning into my mind. The real estate property located at shall be divided equally among the 3 children, Gregory Carter, Melissa Carter, and Rosalind Carter. No deductions or adjustments shall be applied to any share. I had to read it again to be sure I wasn't imagining it. 3 children. Equal shares. No deductions. It was too clear to twist into anything else. I held the paper in my hands, my vision blurring with tears, not of sadness but of outrage and betrayal down to my bones. Evan was still near the door, hesitating as if he wanted to come over but was afraid. I called softly, Evan, come here for a second. He glanced around as if making sure no one saw, then stepped closer. I held the paper out to him. Did you know about this? His eyes darted quickly before he shook his head. No. I've never seen it. Then why was it in a trash bag? I asked, my voice low but shaking with anger. This is my right. And you deserve to know the truth. Evan opened his mouth to respond, but Greg appeared in the doorway, his eyes cold as steel. Evan inside. Evan gave me one last helpless look, then turned away. I folded the paper and shoved it deep into my bag. In that moment, the pieces clicked into place. The rush to sell, the talk of deducting my share, the secret meetings behind my back. They weren't being thoughtless. They had deliberately hidden a legal document so I couldn't claim what was mine. A car horn honked. Jenna had arrived. Her silver SUV pulled up to the curb. She got out and hugged me tight before asking, "Oh my God, what happened to you?" We quickly loaded the bags into her trunk. When the door shut, Jenna looked at me in the rearview mirror, her voice softening, "Tell me everything." On the way to St. Paul, I told her from the start. The business trip to Seattle, the better-than-expected success, the gifts I'd bought for each of them, and then the scene at the gate. Jenna stayed quiet most of the time, only squeezing my hand at red lights. When I reached the part about the will, she clenched her jaw. "This isn't betrayal, Rosalind. This could be illegal." I stared out the window. The last patches of late-season snow still clung to the sidewalks. Every familiar street looked strange now, as if I'd been erased from the map of my own life. When we reached Jenna's apartment, we carried the bags upstairs. Tyler, her boyfriend, helped with the heaviest ones, saying little but looking at me with quiet sympathy. Once everything was inside, Jenna handed me a mug of hot tea. "You need to keep this will somewhere safe. And I think you should talk to a lawyer." I nodded, still trembling inside. But beneath the chaos, an idea was forming. If Dad had left me legal rights to the house, then selling it without my signature wasn't just unfair. It might be against the law. I sat on the floor, opened the envelope again, and this time read every line, every signature. At the bottom corner was the date and the seal of the law office. Undeniable proof. I remembered the day Dad took us to meet the lawyer. I was 8, too young to understand much, only remembering him saying, "I want you kids to always be fair to each other no matter what happens." Now that sentence felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Fair. They'd trampled on that wish the moment they had the chance. "Rosalind, I know you're hurting, but this could be the start of getting justice." I looked up at her, meeting her eyes. The pain hadn't gone, but something else was there now. a spark of resolve. Jenna didn't need to say more. We both knew this story wasn't ending here. And Elaine and the other two, they'd never expect that the envelope they threw away would be the very thing to change everything. The next morning I barely slept, reading it over and over as if to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Finally, I decided to call a name I hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. Mr. Harlan, the lawyer who had handled my father's paperwork. His voice was deep and measured as I remembered. Rosalind? Thomas's daughter. He sounded surprised to hear my name. I gave a brief introduction and asked if he could meet me to review a document. After a few seconds of silence, he agreed immediately. If it's about Thomas, I'll help. Come to my old office this afternoon. It's a small consultation room now, but the files, they're still there. Harlan's office was on the second floor of a red brick building in downtown St. Paul, where the scent of old wood mixed with the smell of long-stored paper. He was much older now, hair white, but his eyes still sharp. I set the photocopy of the will on his desk. He put on his glasses, read each line slowly, then looked up at me. This is a legal copy. Your father signed it in my presence, and our office filed the original with the court according to proper procedure. So, my mother and siblings selling the house without my signature. If the house is jointly owned by all 3 children, then any transaction requires all signatures. Without them, it's a legal violation. I bit my lip, partly relieved I wasn't crazy for thinking they were wrong, but also pained knowing this meant my mother and siblings had deliberately crossed a legal line to push me out. Harlan leaned back in his chair, his voice slowing. Thomas was always worried you, as the youngest, might be at a disadvantage. He made sure everything was clear and fair. I never thought the day would come when you'd have to use this clause. But now it will protect you. I left the office with a complete copy of the file in my hand, feeling like I was carrying a weapon my opponents didn't know I had. That evening, Jenna brought another surprise. She pulled me into the corner of the kitchen and spoke quietly. There's someone I think you should meet. Mark, Tyler's friend. He's a financial investigative reporter, currently tracking some suspicious property sales around Minneapolis. We met Mark at a small cafe by the Mississippi River. He was in his 30s, dressed simply but spoke directly. After Jenna gave him a quick rundown, Mark asked right away, "Do you have any documents proving your ownership?" I handed him the copy from Mr. Harlan. He examined it carefully and nodded. "This is gold. If they really sold without your signature, then this deal looks very questionable. And I'm guessing this isn't the only property with issues." "What do you mean?" "I'm investigating a group of brokers and investors who buy properties at unusually high prices, then give sellers a kickback if they close quickly and keep quiet about the details. These deals often involve bypassing small co-owners, assuming they won't find out or won't dare to sue." A chill ran down my spine. My mother and siblings might have been pulled into, or willingly joined, a game they didn't fully understand. Mark leaned closer. "If you want, I can help gather information. The sale contract, the buyer's name, even the source of their funds. But you need to be ready. Once you go down this path, there's no turning back." I looked out the window at the slow river under the golden lights. Inside me, the pain of betrayal was turning into something else. Resolve. I've already lost everything that was supposed to be home. I have nothing left to lose, I said firmly. In the days that followed, I stayed completely silent with my mother and siblings. No texts, no calls. I wanted them to think I had given up, accepted my fate. Meanwhile, Mark started sending me bits of information. Copies of the house deed, lists of properties bought by the same shell company, and even a photo of the man listed on the sale. A man previously investigated for laundering money through real estate. Jenna's apartment became my base. Every evening after work, we sat around her kitchen table. Me sorting through each email and file, Jenna taking notes and cross-checking details. Some nights, Tyler would drop by, setting a new stack of papers in front of me. "Mark asked me to print these. It's the bank transaction history for the company that bought the house. A lot of the transfers are odd." I flipped through and spotted large sums transferred on the exact date my mother signed the sale, coming from a personal account, not the company's. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the helpless youngest. I was stepping into a battle I had a real chance to win, and this time I wouldn't back down. One late night, Mark called me. There's a charity auction coming up that the company who bought your house will attend. I've got tickets. They won't know who you are if you want to come. This could be a chance to observe firsthand, maybe even overhear something useful. I looked at the ticket he sent via text, my stomach twisting with both nerves and anticipation. Years of living under my mother's rules had taught me to step back, to avoid confrontation. But no. I knew I had to move forward. And I also knew that once I stepped into that room, nothing would ever be the same. 3 months had passed since I left my mother's house, and my life had entered a new chapter. My studio apartment was small but neat, clean, and quiet, something I'd never had living with Elaine. I worked more, lived frugally, and recently my company had won a major industry award. At the award ceremony, standing on stage accepting the trophy on behalf of my team, I thought to myself, if Dad were alive, he'd be proud. But then a call from Elaine on a Thursday afternoon shattered the fragile peace I'd built. Her voice sounded different, softer, almost friendly. Rosalind, the family's having an anniversary celebration this weekend. I want you to come. We need to talk. Elaine rarely used the word we when talking about me. Is something going on? It's just been too long since we were all together. I think now's the right time. Just come. I agreed, but suspicion was already stirring. That night I told Jenna and Mark. Jenna frowned. Out of nowhere after months of no contact? Doesn't sound right. Mark nodded. If you go, let me come with you. I can pretend to be your boyfriend, but mostly I'll be there to observe. I knew they were right. I didn't trust Elaine, and I trusted Greg and Melissa even less. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant in the suburbs of Minneapolis. When Mark and I walked in, golden light fell over a long table where more than 20 people were talking and laughing. Elaine stood in the center, wearing a red dress, her smile wide but her eyes flashing with appraisal the moment she saw me. Greg and Melissa were there too, each chatting with their own cluster of relatives. Rosalind. Elaine walked over, giving me a perfunctory hug before turning to Mark. And this is? Mark, he said, shaking her hand. Pleasure to meet you. Elaine smiled but didn't ask more. We took a corner seat with a clear view of the entire table. I immediately caught Greg's voice from across the room as he spoke to Uncle Fred, my father's younger brother. That investment was a real strategic move. My friend's managing the project brilliantly. Just another 6 months and the profits will double. Melissa chimed in proudly. The money from selling Mom's house went straight into the project. We won't keep the capital, we'll make a huge return. Hearing that was like metal scraping on glass in my mind. The money from selling Mom's house. That phrase made the purpose of this dinner clear. They were boasting to the whole family that selling the house was a financial triumph, while I, the legal co-owner, was erased as if I never existed. Mark leaned toward me and murmured, "That's the project manager friend I told you about. He's been tied to at least 2 fraud lawsuits." I gripped my glass of water, keeping my expression neutral. Across the table, Greg lowered his voice but still loud enough for his group to hear. We got priority because we delivered the house early. Mom was right to act fast. One aunt asked, "What about Rosalind? Where did she fit into that decision?" Greg smirked. She wasn't involved. Didn't contribute to the mortgage, so she couldn't make demands. The words stabbed deeper into my chest. Mark placed a hand over mine, a gesture that was both comfort and a reminder to stay composed. As the main course was served, Elaine got to her feet, raising her wine glass. "I want to thank Greg and Melissa for helping me handle everything so quickly. We've protected the value of our assets and are preparing for a bright future." Every gaze turned toward me, some relatives looking sympathetic, others simply curious. I smiled faintly, masking the storm raging inside. Mark leaned in and said quietly, "I'll try to strike up a conversation with Greg about the project. You watch his reactions." He got up, walked over to Greg, introduced himself as someone working in media, and asked about the potential for promoting his project. I saw Greg grow slightly wary, but he still answered, probably because he wanted to brag. He talked about a private investment fund and guaranteed returns, keywords I knew Mark would commit to memory. Melissa chimed in, offering a few figures about the project's progress, but when Mark asked about licensing and audits, both of them dodged the question. Jenna had been right. This invitation wasn't to reconnect, but to show off their achievements and legitimize the story they had built. I heard their bursts of laughter, yet it felt like I was watching a stage play. I knew if I stayed silent, they'd continue to take my absence as consent. But if I spoke up now, everything would explode in front of everyone. And maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. I stayed seated, my eyes fixed on Greg and his project manager friend. Mark gave me the subtle signal we had agreed on beforehand. His eyes told me everything. He was sure about the man's identity. Mark had told me this man had once been investigated for running a sham investment fund, promising high returns but operating a disguised Ponzi scheme. Although the previous case was dropped for lack of evidence, his name was still on the financial industry's watch list. I took a deep breath, catching the scent of red wine from the glass in front of me. A thought flashed. If they wanted to put on this show of success for the whole family, I'd shatter it right here. I picked up my wine glass, took a big sip, then another. When I felt my face grow warm, part from the wine, part from the adrenaline, I rose, smiling pleasantly. I have something interesting I'd like to share with everyone. The whole table turned to look. Elaine frowned. Rosalind, this isn't the time. Just a few minutes, Mom. I promise. I cut in, still keeping my tone light. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened my recording app. A file appeared, the one I'd saved long ago, capturing a conversation between Greg and Elaine on a night they thought I was asleep. Greg's voice came first, loud and clear through the speaker. If we hand over the house early, they'll pay extra. As for Rosalind's share, just deduct it. 3 years living here without paying the mortgage is reason enough. Elaine's voice followed, steady as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Yes, selling fast gets the bonus. And she didn't contribute anything, so what right does she have to demand? That sound sliced the air in the room like a blade. The clink of a spoon hitting a plate rang sharp. Some relatives exchanged glances. Others stared straight at Elaine and Greg, their faces draining of color. Melissa forced a smile. This must be a misunderstanding. But Mark didn't let her finish. He opened the tablet he'd brought, tapped a few times, then set it on the table so everyone could see. If this is a misunderstanding, Mark said, his voice low and clear, then perhaps you'd also like to explain this. On the screen was a bank account flow chart, with red arrows leading from a shell company in Delaware to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The transaction date matched exactly with the day the house sale contract was signed. The amount transferred was identical to the early delivery bonus Greg had bragged about earlier. Greg shot to his feet, his voice hard. Who are you two? A friend, Mark interrupted, eyes still on the screen, and an investigative journalist. Whispers rippled through the table. Uncle Fred set down his glass, his face flushed. I knew it. I've seen deals from that guy before. And you two, you're mixed up in this. Elaine tried to keep her composure, but her hands gripped the table edge tightly. This is a family matter. No one has the right to. No, Mom, I cut in, for the first time calling her that in front of everyone. This isn't a family matter. This is my legal right, and it's deceit against your own kin. Some relatives stood, their faces cold. One pulled out a phone, starting to record everything. In the corner, Greg's project manager friend quietly edged toward the door, but a younger cousin blocked him. Oh no, you're staying. We want to hear your explanation. No one spoke for several seconds. The restaurant's background music suddenly felt out of place. I glanced around. Melissa was whispering to Greg while Elaine stared down at the table. Mark leaned toward me and murmured, their positions shaking. Now's the time to stay in control. I turned to the family, speaking each word clearly. I've stayed silent long enough. They sold the house my father left to all 3 children without my signature. They took the bonus and put it into a shady project. I no longer believe what they say, but I believe in evidence. And this, I pointed to Mark's tablet, is evidence. Some nodded, others shook their heads in disbelief. But I could see it. In their eyes, the image of me as the useless youngest was already cracking. And for me, that was the start of the real fight. I didn't expect Evan to come to me right after that dinner. But the next afternoon, as I was making coffee in my small kitchen, a knock sounded at the door. Opening it, I saw my brother standing there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes avoiding mine. Can I come in? Evan asked softly, so quiet I had to lean to hear him. I let him in. The cold street air followed him into the apartment. He sat in the chair by the window, his hands laced together. He was silent for a long moment before speaking. About last night. I want to apologize. I've known for a long time the way they treat you is wrong. But he hesitated. I was afraid to stand up to them. I could see the conflict on his face. Evan had always been the quiet one, rarely arguing. I understood that fear. I'd lived with it nearly all my childhood. I know you were pushed out of the house, had your inheritance cut. It was all unfair. But if I'd said anything then, I'm not sure I could have lasted in this family. He gave a sheepish smile. At least now you know I wasn't on their side. I sighed. I didn't want to turn this visit into a trial, but I also couldn't erase the hurt with a few words. I put a hand on his shoulder. Thank you for telling me the truth. That matters to me. 3 days later, Elaine called me. The call came in the evening just as I'd finished a few work emails. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity made me swipe to accept. Her voice was shaky, mixed with heavy breaths. Rosalind, the money, it's gone. I waited for her to continue. Greg's project was a mistake. That friend ran off. We lost everything. Her voice broke. I have nothing left. There was a long silence between us. Then she said, almost pleading, you have to help me. You're my daughter. I closed my eyes, the image of those black trash bags the day I was kicked out flashing in my mind, along with the will they had tried to hide. My voice was unnervingly calm. I'll help. But on one condition. Elaine drew a deep breath. What condition? You have to sign a document acknowledging my legal inheritance rights to the house, whether it's been sold or not, and to any related assets. And, I paused, letting the words weigh heavier, you have to attend family therapy with me. On the other end, absolute silence. I could almost hear the seconds ticking by. Family therapy? She repeated as if it were a foreign concept. Yes. If you want my help, you need to agree to sit down with me, talk to a mediator. We need someone in the middle to stop this cycle. She gave a short, bitter laugh. You think a few therapy sessions will change anything? I don't know. But I know if we don't try, nothing will ever change. A long sigh followed. Fine. That's the price. I agree. 2 days later, I received an email from a law office. A signed settlement agreement from Elaine, confirming my legal inheritance rights. I printed it and placed it with the will's file. For the first time in months, I felt I'd reclaimed a piece of the place that had always been mine. The first therapy session took place in a small room at a family counseling center in St. Paul. Elaine arrived on time wearing a dark coat and no makeup. Her eyes still held caution, but at least she sat down facing me. The therapist, a woman in her 50s named Karen, began in a gentle voice. Today, our goal is to listen to each other without interrupting. Rosalind, would you like to start? I want to understand, why? Why did you choose to do that instead of talking to me? I thought you would object. And I didn't want a confrontation. Selling quickly meant getting the money quickly. I trusted Greg. Trusted him enough to disregard my rights? I asked back. I was wrong. But at the time, I thought I needed to wrap it up quickly so everything would be settled. What do I hear from what you just said? I hear that you were willing to sacrifice fairness for convenience. And I was the one who had to pay the price for that convenience. Elaine looked up, her eyes reddening. I didn't think you'd be hurt that badly. Well, now you know, I said, keeping my gaze steady. And this is why we need therapy. That day didn't end with a hug or forgiveness, but I left the room with a different feeling. Less heavy and, with a small crack open for hope. I wasn't sure if Elaine could truly change. But at least I saw her willing to sit down and listen instead of just giving orders. And I knew that was a step, however small, necessary for me to decide whether to let go or hold on to this family bond. On a chilly Monday morning, the settlement money landed in my account. I stared at the number on my computer screen for several seconds before I could believe it was real. The civil lawsuit against Greg and Elaine had dragged on longer than I expected, but in the end, the court recognized they had violated the terms of the will when they sold the house without my consent. It wasn't about the money, though it was enough to completely change my financial situation. It was about the feeling of being acknowledged. My name, my rights had been legally upheld. Less than a month later, I found a 2-bedroom apartment in the Linden Hills neighborhood of Minneapolis. It had large windows overlooking Lake Harriet with light flooding in every morning. I walked through each empty room, imagining where I'd place my bookshelves, where I'd hang my travel photos. No one to interfere, no one to call my taste odd. I chose an olive green sofa, an oak dining table, and a beige linen armchair for reading. In the small home office, I set my desk facing the window so I could watch the lake change colors with the seasons while I worked. The feeling of arranging everything exactly how I wanted was both new and comforting. On moving day, Jenna and Tyler arrived early and Mark came to help too. We laughed as we tried to maneuver the large sofa through the narrow doorway. That evening, I stood in the kitchen preparing for the housewarming. Close friends, coworkers, and even a few acquaintances from the legal aid group I had started came by. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the apartment. When everyone gathered in the living room, I raised my glass. Thank you for being there when I was at my weakest. Without you, I couldn't be standing here today in this home. Mark grinned and clinked his glass with mine. And thank you for giving us a new place to hang out. The legal aid project for young people who'd been cut out of their inheritance or financially exploited had been born from nights sitting with Jenna, remembering how lost I'd felt not knowing where to start. I didn't want other young people to feel as alone as I once did. I named the project Key Back. We partnered with volunteer lawyers, offering free consultations, guiding them through legal steps, and connecting them with emotional support resources. The first meeting was in a small community room with only 6 attendees. A short-haired young woman around 20 shared that her family had sold her grandparents' land without asking her. A young man said his brother had emptied their shared savings account, leaving it at zero. I listened, feeling a mix of pain and determination. When they asked how to start reclaiming their rights, I opened my laptop, showed them sample forms, and explained each step, exactly as Mr. Harlan had patiently done for me. When the meeting ended, the short-haired woman came up and hugged me tightly. I didn't think anyone would understand, until I heard you speak. I gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. You're not alone. Work at my company continued, but Key Back quickly became a vital part of my life. Every week, I devoted at least 2 evenings to working with the group, the rest to answering emails and finding funding sources. Not every case had a perfect ending, but every time I saw someone walk out of the room with a little less despair in their eyes, I knew I was on the right path. One late autumn afternoon, with yellow leaves covering the path to the building, I stood on my balcony, looking out at the rippling lake. The wind carried the chill of the coming winter, but I didn't shiver. I had known days when the cold came from the inside, from doors slammed shut in my face. Now I opened my own door, welcoming in those who needed shelter. Jenna stepped out, handing me a cup of hot tea. You've turned your pain into something truly useful. I smiled. Maybe this is the first time in my life I feel I completely belong here. That morning, April air was crisp but full of sunlight. I holding a hot cup of coffee, watching the lights spill over the waking streets of Minneapolis. The distant hum of traffic blended with birdsong from the trees below, making me realize I had started to love this rhythm of life. A rhythm no longer bound by caution or fear. My phone buzzed. It was Evan. He texted, "Are you free tonight? I'll bring some of Mom's pastries." I smiled and replied yes. Since everything happened, Evan had stayed in regular contact, sometimes stopping by for tea, sometimes fixing a tilted bookshelf for me. He never tried to make up for it with hollow words. His quiet presence was comfort enough. That afternoon, I walked to the legal aid office. The space was small but brimming with energy. My desk was covered in files. Cases of young people cut out of their inheritance, most unable to afford a lawyer. A 19-year-old named Max was waiting outside, twisting his backpack strap. When he came in, he hesitated. "Do you think I have a chance to win?" Looking into his uncertain eyes, I saw myself years ago. I answered softly but firmly, "We'll do everything we can. What matters is you don't give up before you start." He gave a small nod, his shoulders relaxing slightly. In that moment, I understood. Each case I took wasn't a lawsuit but a chance for someone to reclaim their voice. That evening, Evan arrived with a paper bag smelling of fresh pastries. He sat at the kitchen counter, glancing around the apartment I had recently painted. "You've made this place so warm," he said, his tone both admiring and tinged with a quiet regret. "I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner." I set the plate of pastries on the table and poured 2 cups of tea. "Evan, what matters is you did the right thing when you could." I haven't forgotten, but I also don't want it to drag us down forever." He nodded, relief in his eyes. A week later, I ran into Elaine at the grocery store. She was wearing an old sweater, her hair neatly pinned back, pushing a cart with a few basics. She stopped when she saw me, her gaze hesitant. "Are you doing well?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine, thank you." "And you?" "I'm still trying. Therapy has made me look at a lot of things. But," she paused, then took a deep breath, "I know it'll take a long time for you to trust me again." We parted after a few polite exchanges. On the way home, I realized I no longer felt the heaviness I once did. This distance might be the best way to keep peace on both sides. Sometimes, Greg and Melissa still showed up at the rare family gatherings hosted by distant relatives. But they avoided meeting my eyes. Maybe they thought I was still angry or simply didn't know what to say. I didn't need answers from them anymore. Late at night, I stepped onto the balcony, the city below glowing with lights. I placed my hand on the railing, feeling the chill of the metal. A year ago, I had been here before, anxious about the future. Now I knew. The future wasn't something to fear. It was a place I could step into on my own terms, with people and values worth keeping. Every family story has its shadows that outsiders can never fully grasp. Some would say I was too harsh. Others would say I was too forgiving. But in the end, only those involved know which boundaries must be kept to protect their peace. I still believe forgiveness doesn't mean flinging the door wide open as if nothing happened. Sometimes, forgiveness is to lighten your own heart, but the door still needs a strong lock. And you are the one who keeps the key. And you, what about you? If you were in my place, would you choose to forgive and keep your distance or close every door forever? I truly want to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to keep following and hearing more true family stories about hard but necessary choices, subscribe so you won't miss the next one. I believe somewhere in these stories, you might find a piece of your own answer.